My name is Chris, and this story happened about 2 years ago in September. I was 15 years old and had at the time started a new school. I was there for about 2 weeks and I had yet to make any friends. There was another new student that started. His name was Caleb. He was a bit socially awkward, but we started talking, hanging out together, and soon became friends. We both had something in common in being the new kids at school. I hung out with Caleb at school a few times during the weekends. The more time I spent with this dude, Caleb, the more uncomfortable I became around him. He would always speak about strange or depressing topics. He would ask me things like how I will kill somebody and get away with it. Every weird question he asked me, he would then tell me in great length and detail what he would do in that situation. It was like he thought about this stuff all the time. One weekend I went to Caleb's house for a sleepover. When I arrived at Caleb's house, he was home alone. Caleb never spoke about his mom, and he told me that his dad was always working late and he wouldn't see him until the morning time. So we ordered pizza, played video games, and watched movies until late at night. I remember looking at the time and I saw it was 2:40 a.m. I said I was tired and I told Caleb I wanted to go to sleep. So I went downstairs because I would be sleeping on the fold-out couch and Caleb would be sleeping in his room. It took some time for me to fall asleep because Caleb kept me awake by walking around upstairs and switching the lights on and off. I remember having an awful dream that I was drowning and I felt like I was about to die. I woke up in a panic and Caleb had his hands around my throat. He was shaking me. I sat up coughing and struggling to breathe. After I sat up, Caleb asked if I was alright and told me that he came downstairs to get a glass of water and saw it looked like I was having a nightmare, so he shook me to wake me up. I told Caleb I was fine and I thanked him for waking me up. Caleb went back upstairs. I was a bit shook up from what just happened, so I didn't fall asleep right away. I eventually calmed down and managed to get back to sleep after about an hour. When I woke up in the morning, I saw Caleb sitting on the couch on the other side of the room, staring at me. He said I should leave because his dad would be home soon. It was an odd way to end our sleepover, I remember thinking to myself. I thought about if Caleb's dad even knew I was even staying over. Either way, I didn't feel welcomed anymore, so I did what Caleb said and I left to go home. About 2 days later, someone on Facebook messaged me saying that they saw that I was friends with Caleb, and they told me that Caleb used to go to their school. He didn't warn me to stay away from him. He said Caleb was accused of killing another student at a sleepover, and the case went to court. Caleb was found not guilty due to a lack of motive and evidence, but the school Caleb was at didn't want him there anymore. I wasn't sure if I believed what that random person had told me about Caleb, but I did think about the recent sleepover I had. I thought about if Caleb really was trying to wake me up from a nightmare, or was he trying to kill me in my sleep? Caleb did make me feel uncomfortable at times, but after being told he was accused of killing another student, it kinda made me afraid of him. I decided not to spend so much time with Caleb after that, and only hung out with him in school. About 2 months later, he moved away, and I eventually lost contact with him, until a few years later. I saw something on Facebook about a murder in another town. I saw Caleb's picture and I read about what happened. Caleb managed to get a girlfriend, and one day he went to her house to spend time with her while she was babysitting her brother. While Caleb was there, his girlfriend fell asleep as he played video games with her younger brother. She woke up to a woman screaming. That woman was her mother. Caleb's girlfriend went downstairs, saw her mother on her knees screaming. She then looked over at the game area where her brother and Caleb were. At least she thought Caleb was there. What she saw was horrifying. Her brother was laying on his back. Blood was everywhere. But that wasn't the worst of it. His head was missing and Caleb wasn't anywhere to be found. They immediately called the cops, and Caleb was actually caught roaming the streets with blood all over him, including his mouth. Caleb confessed to killing the little boy, but he also confessed to eating parts of him. One thing that they never found was his head. Caleb doesn't remember. Well, at least that's what he told the police.
Before I even get to my story, I want to emphasize the point of me writing this. There was more than enough blame for what happened to go around for all of us. The decision was ours to cut corners. Trusting our mother's home to a stranger was stupid. No one denies that. However, the events that unfolded as a result were 100% not our fault. We did everything society tells us to do. The police were called, and their job was to protect my sister. They failed in their job. This is on their hands. My number one aim is to impress upon you to know that it's important to fully vet any individual before allowing them to access your home. The following story is written to drive home this very important point. At the end of 2019, just before Christmas in fact, my mother passed away from a long-term illness. As I was already married and set up in a home of my own, my mother left her home to my younger sister, Emily. Emily had been renting up until this time. Her lease had just ended, so she moved in until she was sure of what she was going to do with it. She knew she had my support regardless of her decision. My wife and I threw her a surprise housewarming party for her. At the party, one of Emily's coworkers gave her a kitten as a gift. She'd been unable to have any pets in her apartment. It was love at first sight. The weeks after the party were life as usual for all of us. Emily managed to litter train the kitten, and all was going well. Just before Valentine's Day, Emily's employer notified her of a business conference she was required to attend. It was part of her job, and this would be her first trip since she had moved into the new house. Normally this would be simple, but now, with the kitten, things were a tad more complicated. My family was unable to watch the kitten because of my daughter's allergies. Kenneling was briefly considered until the price was found to be too great. Besides, she didn't like the idea of her precious little angel being locked up for 3 days. She chose to search on Craigslist for house sitters. An earlier call to a service proved too high also. She found this young girl, around 19, who claimed to be an independent house sitter. They spoke first on the phone, then met at the house so she could look around. The girl seemed kind and professional. After agreeing on an amount, the deal was set. 2 weeks later, Emily kissed her kitty goodbye and left for her trip. She checked in the first night and all sounded like it was going well. 2 days later, she returned to a nightmare. The clean, beautiful home she had left was now scattered with clothes and dirty dishes. When she confronted the girl got mad and said she wasn't a maid. Things only got worse from there. My sister was horrified to see that the litter box was full and the kitten had already began going on the floor. Certainly not the poor cat's fault, and this infuriated my sister and she refused to pay the girl. An argument broke out and the police were eventually called. They really couldn't do much other than force the girl to leave the property, but the girl was furious. She vowed she'd get back at my sister as she left. This was all said in front of the police, but they obviously didn't take the threat seriously. The officer went on their way and my sister began cleaning up the mess inside. A few days passed and Emily tried to put the experience behind her. That Friday, soon after returning from work, a man rang the doorbell and asked for her. She identified herself and the man began demanding the money owed to the young girl. My sister calmly explained the situation, but he only grew more aggressive. Although she was now terrified, she held her ground and refused. This was when the man backhanded her. She fell back and hit her head on the floor. Unfortunately, he wasn't done. He approached her and demanded the money again. My sister, who was clearly concussed, didn't answer, so he punched her unconscious. Apparently, while she was out, he entered the house and stole all the cash from her purse. By the time she had awakened, he was gone. It took her several minutes to crawl to her phone and call 911. They arrived soon after and she was rushed to the hospital. I'm happy to say that there's no long-term physical injuries, but mentally, Emily was a mess. And still is, honestly. To be frank, had I known the identity of the man and his location, I would have killed him. Fortunately, I regained my senses and agreed to leave it in the authorities' hands, despite their inability to prevent it. The responsible parties were found and arrested within a couple of days. It wasn't some great mystery after all. The man who assaulted Emily was an ex-boyfriend of the young girl. She had promised him half of the money to retrieve it. The young girl claimed she never intended anyone to be hurt, but her threat in front of witnesses, cops at that, sealed her fate. She managed to get away with probation because she had no priors. Her ex, on the other hand, had a long record. He was given 3 years. But once the COVID crisis began, he was released early. The entire family was less than happy to hear of the lenient sentences, but criminals getting off easy is nothing new under the sun these days. In the months since the attack, everyone has done their most to be there for Emily. Her recovery is going well, and she seems to be responding to therapy. The lockdowns have proved a blessing for her. She's been able to heal at a much slower and calm pace. Until restrictions are lifted completely, she'd been approved to work from home. Her little furry friend has served as a priceless companion for her during this terrible time. Although some may say he was the cause of this whole awful mess, I'm glad he's been around to keep her company. I don't want to be too specific with details here, but I'm sure you'll understand why I'm wise to being a bit paranoid by the end of this. I've been into urban exploring, or urbex as people are calling it these days, for just as long as I can remember. I think it all stems from being an extreme introvert. How when other kids were playing together on jungle gyms and swing sets, I preferred being off my own, exploring some hidden corner of the park or wherever we were. By the time I was a teenager, I was cracking bigger and bigger targets, traveling across town on my bike on weekends to tag derelicts with a can of spray paint. Then in my 20s, I was traveling across the Northeast to hit up some classics, as well as some lesser-known derps that hadn't been scouted out all that well. But I definitely had 2 or 3 haunts in my hometown I'd hit up once or twice a year, just to see how they were progressing, so to speak. It's more like degressing, actually, but you get my point. Buildings would accumulate filth, become home to animals, maybe people. You'd get graffiti artists coming in and out. It was nice seeing them age. Of all the places I'd thought I'd come closest to losing my life, it definitely wasn't in my local toads. I knew them like the back of my hand, and they were my favorite because they were relatively safe. But anyway, on with the story. I'm wandering around this big old industrial complex, marveling at how Mother Nature seemed to be slowly taking it back, one cracked paving slab at a time. I stopped to eat some sandwiches I'd packed with me, sitting up in the office of an old factory that looked over the shop floor. All the glass was smashed out, and I'm just sitting in the filthy old chair trying to eat as cleanly as possible when I suddenly begin to hear voices. At first, I start to worry, thinking it might be security or even the cops. I didn't think the place had any active cameras, or that I'd been spotted by anyone on duty, so I'm kinda angry at myself for slipping, at least until I hear the voices getting louder and louder. They didn't sound like cops at all, but they were definitely headed into the building that I was in. The only question was, what were they doing there? But unfortunately for me, it wasn't long before I found out. This isn't exactly what they said, just a close approximation from memory, but here it goes. Guy 1. I'm telling you, man, this is bad news. They got him with 12 keys and he's gonna roll on us. Guy 2. We can get him counted, that's not the problem. It's the names he drops between now and then, the ones that can come back to us. Guy 1. But do we even know who he's named? We can't just rub out 6 guys assuming they're all gonna turn states. Guy 2. We don't have a choice. Guy 3. He's right. There are almost $500,000 at stake here. We can't afford to take chances. Everyone has to go. Guy 1. Wait. You gotta be kidding me. We're gonna rub out 6 of our own guys? Guy 3. You heard what I said. Get it done. Anyone who knows, get it done. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Some kind of murderous criminal conspiracy, possibly over drugs or other illegal imports, and it was going down just meters away from me. Now try to think of the worst thing that could possibly happen at that point. Outside of the world getting hit by an asteroid, what's the one thing you wouldn't want to happen in that situation? For those of you that answered, my phone suddenly going off, then ding ding ding, right answer. Because right as these guys were about to leave, I got a call. I didn't even see who it was. I just mashed the lower volume button to silence the ringtone, then heard, "Who's that? Who's there?" before the sound of running. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life. And if it wasn't for the fact that I knew the place like the back of my hand, I might not be here telling you all this today. I was so scared that I didn't even go home that night. I just went to another of my favorite toads and hung out there until morning, only leaving when I was certain that I wasn't being followed. In retrospect, I don't think they saw my face or anything, and they probably thought I was an undercover narc or something, I don't know. But nothing ever came of the incident, and I had no idea who the guys were to be able to follow their case in the news or whatever. It was definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while urbexing though, and it's taught me to, overall, expect the unexpected.
I still couldn't believe it. 2 years wasted. For 2 years, I dated Ji-young. What did it mean to her? Just free dinners and rides to places? What else? For weeks, I wallowed in self-pity, shut in my room, hearing the ticking of the clock as I tried desperately to find sleep. Instead, I found myself questioning everything, wondering if anything I had done was worth a damn. It came to its worst when I bought a gun from the dark web, adamant on ending it all right there. Until a letter slid from underneath my front door. I opened it. "Hey Dongyan, we were wondering how you were feeling, man. You haven't picked up the phone, and we tried knocking, but no one answered. Come see us at Hansok's on Saturday. The theme's Squid Game, you know. It's the Netflix show that everyone's talking about. Hope to see you soon, buddy. From Minjae." I sighed and scrunched up the letter, tossing it into a bin. I went on Amazon and ordered myself a costume. I might as well go to the party. About a week later, I found myself at the front door of Hansok's, wearing the green jumpsuit from the show. I'd only watched about half of it. Correction, I watched half of it with my girlfriend. Well, before, you know. It was okay, but never really caught on to me. But it was the theme of the party, so I followed it reluctantly. Before leaving my car, I checked the glove compartment, and there was my gun. I still didn't feel happy inside, and even on the drive here, those suicidal tendencies didn't seem to go away. I vowed to keep the damn thing with me until I felt better somewhat. But hell, things still weren't looking good. Hansok's house was outside of the city, this small cottage that he rented from his grandma. It was a nice change of environment from the constant hustle and bustle of the city. I felt 10 pounds lighter already. I knocked and was almost thrown aback as a familiar face threw its arms around me. It was my friend Yuna. She had always been good to me, even as kids.
"Come inside."
She said, taking my hand and leading me inside.
"You're contestant 456, right?
Huh?
Your number, silly.
She jabbed a finger against my chest.
Have you even watched the show?"
Little, yeah. Anything else she said was lost on me as I noticed her. Rage burned inside me. I clenched Yuna's hand tighter. Across the hall, there she was, my ex, Ji-young. And beside her, none other than Tae-hyung, the guy she replaced me with. I caught her attention, and she stopped mid-conversation. I was brought back by a slap on the wrist.
"Hey, you're hurting me."
Sorry.
"What are you looking at?"
Yuna looked at Ji-young and nearly choked.
"Yikes, I completely forgot. Come on, we'll hang out with these guys."
When my friends saw me, they let out a cheer. "So he ain't dead after all." I winced a bit. "Or he's back from the dead," said Hansok, slapping a hand around my shoulder. "Look, man, I didn't know Tae-hyung was gonna invite her, alright? I'm sorry." I chuckled in response and assured him that everything was okay. "Things happen, man, but I'm over it." "Good to hear. Now, who's up for a game?" Everyone gathered around, and it was only then that I noticed Hansok was the only one wearing a different costume. We were in the green jumpsuits, but he wore this black outfit, complete with the mask. If I remember right, he was supposed to be the front man or something. It was only fitting, being the host of the party and all. Every now and then, I stole a glance at Ji-young. She seemed so happy. Why couldn't I be like that? Before I could think of anything else, Han-seok clapped his hands together, catching our attention. Today we'll be recreating the games from the show, ladies and gentlemen. He bowed and led us into his garden. It was a sizable one, with enough space to run around in it. I think most of us knew what the game was before it even began. Han-seok then explained the rules of red light, green light. At the end of it, he reached into his pocket and drew out a pistol. We all chuckled a little as he pretended to shoot each one of us. Without further ado, he turned his back on us, and we slowly made our way to the other end. Anytime he turned around, we stopped in our tracks, and so on. We continued this pattern until all of us were only about 5 meters or so from reaching him. I noticed Han-seok didn't make a single sound, not even when we giggled or laughed. It felt a little off. Suddenly, Taehyung tripped, caught mid-sprint by a pothole. He shrugged his shoulders as Han-seok pointed his weapon at him, and then fired. It sounded a lot louder than what we were expecting, but instead of a yelp or short cry from getting hit by a BB pellet, Taehyung just fell on his face. No sound whatsoever. We all withheld from laughing, but amusement turned into horror when a red patch began to form under him. Han-seok turned his back again, but this time I ran backwards. I didn't stop until I reached the house again and ducked under a table. Outside, I heard more gunshots and then screams. Just barely, I could make out the lifeless corpses of Taehyung and Min-jae. Ji-young and Yuna were nowhere to be seen. Tentatively, I snuck towards the front door and opened it, barreling into my car. Jamming my key in, I turned the ignition, but my heart sank when the engine started and died. I tried again, and once more the car failed to start. With no other options, I took my gun from the glove compartment and hid. So many thoughts ran through my head. Was this real? Am I in a dream? Why am I such a coward? I ran from everything in my life, and I was doing it again. I thought of Yuna, and realized it wasn't fair. She had always helped me at my lowest points, and it was about time I returned the favor. I left the car and ran back into the garden. The first thing I saw was Ji-young, dead, slumped on the floor. Sickeningly, I didn't feel anything but relief. She had been the cause of my sadness, and now she had gotten what she deserved. It was quiet. Too damn quiet. The wind whipped through the cottage, shaking windows and whistling around the room. It seemed almost abandoned, but I knew he was out there somewhere. I didn't think we were gonna make it, but we did. We're safe now, I'm sure.
Frontman 29 has been eliminated. Contestants 67 and 456 have advanced to the next stage. Arrange for their arrival and let the next game commence.